My name is Jill Smith. I teach at Morton Elementary, 3rd grade, and we are working on Unit 12, Comparative Essays. The kids have already worked entirely through the unit and are now working on their report card assessment where they need to compare and contrast land snails with crayfish. We did a practice compare and contrast essay last week on 2 plants, and we were going over that in today's lesson and just reflecting on some student writing to show good examples of what their writing should look like. So last week we got started on our comparative writing. We did our compare and contrast writing for the 3rd time this year, and we worked all the way through our unit on what makes a good comparative essay. Remember, there is a certain form or certain organization that we have to follow. Show me with your fingers, how many paragraphs do I look for when you're writing essays? Comparative essays should be 4 paragraphs in length. We call this paragraph, Kaylee?
1.
Paragraph 1, and we call it try it, CJ. Everyone. Introduction paragraph. One more time. Introduction paragraph. What's the purpose? Raise your hand if you can tell me. What's the purpose? What's the point of the introduction paragraph? Brendan?
It tells us, it introduces what we're going to do for what we're going to compare, like what we did for whales and fish. That's what we were going to compare a long time ago, so we had to introduce it.
We have to introduce the topic, what we're writing about. Last week I had you write about what 2 plants? Do you remember the names of those plants, Bella? Conifer, which is similar to a pine. And then the moss plant, which we know grows in shaded, dark areas where there's a lot of moisture. I see moss growing up the side of barns and tree trunks in shaded, kind of damp places. All right. We introduce the topic here in our introduction paragraph. Then we spend the whole 2nd paragraph doing what? Talk to an elbow buddy. What do we do in this paragraph? How they're alike. How the 2 objects are similar or alike. Excellent job. Talk with a different elbow buddy about paragraph 3. What's the point of paragraph 3? 10 seconds. And then finally we get to our 4th paragraph, which we call a conclusion. Closing or conclusion paragraph. We want to wrap things up in a pretty little bow. We want to maybe hold off and save one cool fact to share with our audience at the end. But basically, we're not going to make the audience guess when our piece is over. We're going to know that it's time to give a round of applause because they've taken the time to kind of re-summarize or reintroduce. Sometimes we use that full circle and go right back into our introduction in our closing paragraph. So this was the rubric. I got to share your papers on moss and conifer last week. So we were looking for 4 different areas in which to score you on. The first one had to do with ideas. And if you scored really high, then you were way down here because your ideas were really clear, really focused on the topic, and you really thought through those details. You didn't just maybe come up with the first couple ideas and use those ideas. We all know these 2 objects are plants and living things, but you kind of dug a little deeper and thought about those ideas and thought about the most creative ideas. Then we looked at your organization. We just went through that. A comparative essay is organized, isn't it? Yeah. There is a certain specific way you have to write this, and this is the format that we've always used this year. This is what I was looking for. If I couldn't clearly see your 4 paragraphs, then you might have scored down a little bit, somewhere in the 1s and 2s. But if you use the format that we just went over, then that made your ideas clear and organized in exactly the way it should flow from beginning to middle to end, and you would have gotten 3 points out of 3 possible for organization. Then I'm looking for your style. What do you think is meant by your style? If you don't know, take a minute to read through these 4 boxes. Pick one right in the middle to start with. So not only am I looking for those words that help us with compare and contrast, like however and but, similar to, alike, but I'm also looking for what other type of words? Thinking about plants. Can you give me a scientific word? Talk with a neighbor. Let's snake around the room and hear as many scientific words as possible related to plants.
Produce. That's seeds we're
Produce.
making.
Photosynthesis. Nutrients. Soil instead of dirt. Good.
Scientific.
Scientific. Okay.
Conifers.
Conifer. Good. Carbon dioxide is important when talking about plants. Matt? H2O. They don't just write down the first word that pops in their mind. And then finally, conventions. And for whatever reason, third graders, this seems to be the area that we score lowest in our conventions. Taking the time to put in our periods. I've invited 2 guest speakers to come up and share their comparative essays with us from last week. I want you to be thinking about these 4 areas and how you would score. And I'll let you know how similar your scoring was to what we decided last week when us third graders take a look. So let's give Emma our full attention. I'm going to clip this little microphone on you. You get to be the star for a moment.
Today we will compare and contrast moss and conifers. I am doing it for a science experiment at school. One way that moss and conifers are alike is they are both plants. The second similarity is that they are both green. And the last similarity is they grow outside. Now we will see some differences. One difference is that moss is soft. On the other hand, conifers are pokey. The second difference is moss has little veins, but conifers have big veins. Our last difference is that moss only grows in shade. However, conifers can grow anywhere. How did you like the essay? I loved it.
Give her a round. So looking back at our rubric, how would you have scored your classmate? Let's take a look at ideas. Are her ideas clear and focused on the task, thoroughly developed with relevant details and examples? Quick show of hands, how many of you are giving 6? Hands down. And how many of you would score her with a 4? We're going to go with the majority here. Most of you gave her a 6 on ideas. Let's jump down to organization. Emma was asked to share her paper because she did a really good job on following those directions. Let's give her one more round of applause. And before I bring up our second guest, I want to talk to you about your goal today. We have started to compare and contrast 2 of our science critters. We read a story about those science critters last week. In fact, we reread that story a second time at the end of last week. You had a chance to observe these creatures in plastic containers, the live version. What 2 topics do you think you'll be writing about in writing today? Yeah, Kylie? Crayfish and land snails is correct. You've learned a lot of information about crayfish and land snails, and there's lots more to learn. When you get back to your seat, you're going to get a similar Venn diagram. It's not identical to mine, but it has the 2 circles, and I'd like you to spend your writing time today comparing and contrasting these 2 critters. Let's brainstorm together some ideas to get us started. Thinking back to your observations last week and thinking back to those stories that we read in class, How are crayfish and land snails alike? 30 seconds to share with a friend. Similarities. And we're sharing ideas on how these two are alike. How are snails like crayfish, Chris? They are. They're both alive. They require certain things to survive. We could think about their needs. Good. Elizabeth? Ton of knowledge about these two topics, and you're ready to begin forming your ideas. Your job today, boys and girls, as writers, is to begin what part of the writing process? What are we doing? What are we collecting today, Vaughn? We're collecting our information, we're collecting our notes, and we are putting them into a Venn diagram so that we can use those ideas when we get to writing our next compare and contrast essay. How many similarities should you have? Cole?
3.
How many differences? Show me with your fingers, everyone. For a total of, you can do this. 6. Very good. Can I go above and beyond and wow my teacher today? Do I ever turn that down?
No.
Okay, so as quietly as you move to the carpet, you are moving away from the carpet. You'll pull out a pencil immediately, and